The fluorescent lights of Morrison and associates hummed their usual monotonous tune as Sarah. Chen pushed through the glass doors at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes earlier than required. In one arm, she balanced her laptop bag and a worn diaper carrier. In the other, she cradled 3-month-old Emma, who stirred softly against her mother's chest, blissfully unaware that today would mark a turning point neither of them could have imagined. Sarah's hands trembled as she signed in at the security desk. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Her mother, who'd promised to watch. Emma, while Sarah returned to work after her unpaid maternity leave, had fallen ill the night before with a fever that made babysitting impossible. The daycare wouldn't accept Emma for another 2 weeks. When her vaccination schedule would be complete, Sarah had called every friend, every neighbor, even her ex-sister-in-law whom she barely spoke to anymore. No one was available on such short notice. She could have called in sick. Should have, perhaps. But Sarah had already missed 2 days last month when Emma caught a cold, and her supervisor's tight-lipped expression had spoken volumes about tolerance levels. As a single mother working as a junior data analyst, Sarah lived in perpetual fear of that phone call, that meeting, that moment when she'd become expendable. So here she was, hoping to keep Emma quiet in her small cubicle, praying that somehow she could make it through just one day until she figured out a solution. The office was mercifully empty at this hour. Sarah had planned it that way. She quickly assembled a makeshift nursery in the corner of her cubicle, tucking blankets around Emma's car seat and positioning herself so her body would block the view from the main walkway. Her heart hammered as she logged into her computer and pulled up the quarterly report she needed to finish. For 2 miraculous hours, Emma slept. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, accomplishing more before 9 a.m. than she typically managed by noon. She was beginning to think she might actually pull this off when Emma woke with a cry that seemed to echo off every glass panel in the open-plan office. "Shh, baby, please," Sarah whispered urgently, scooping her daughter up and rocking her gently. She'd prepared bottles, had them ready in the small office refrigerator. But Emma was working up to a full wail, her tiny face reddening with distress. "Is that a baby?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. She turned to find Melissa from accounting standing at the cubicle entrance, eyes wide with surprise. "I'm so sorry," Sarah began, the words tumbling out in a rushed whisper. "It's just for today. My babysitter got sick and I couldn't find anyone else, and I promise she won't be any trouble. I'll keep her quiet. I'll work through lunch. I'll stay late." But Melissa had already walked away, and Sarah knew with sinking certainty where she was headed. Within minutes, she'd return with management. Sarah would be written up, possibly fired. She held Emma closer, fighting back tears. How had her life become this precarious, this fragile? What Sarah didn't know was that Melissa hadn't gone to report her. She'd gone to the break room to warm a bottle, remembering the temperature tricks from her own children's infant days. And she wasn't the only one who'd noticed. James Morrison III had arrived at his family's investment firm at 6 a.m., as he had every morning for 30 years. At 62, with silver hair and custom-tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, he looked every inch the millionaire he was. His office occupied the entire top floor, separated from the worker bees below by both elevation and circumstance. He rarely ventured down to where the actual work happened. He paid people to manage people to manage people. But this morning, preparing for a video conference with Tokyo, he'd realized he needed the Henderson file that his assistant had left on the 3rd floor. Rather than call someone, he'd decided to retrieve it himself. Taking the stairs for the exercise his doctor kept insisting he needed. That's when he heard it, the cry of an infant, unmistakable and wholly out of place in the corporate corridor. He followed the sound, decades of boardroom instincts making his footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. What he found made him pause. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, sat in a cramped cubicle surrounded by financial spreadsheets and charts. She held a baby against her shoulder, bouncing gently while her free hand still gripped a mouse, her eyes darting between the crying infant and her computer screen. Her blazer, James noticed, was threadbare at the elbows. The diaper bag beside her chair was decorated with cartoon animals, but appeared to be held together with safety pins in one corner. He watched as another woman approached with a warm bottle, as the young mother's face flooded with grateful relief. He saw the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion, the determination. And suddenly, James Morrison III wasn't standing in his family's firm. He was standing in a small apartment in Queens, watching his own mother, newly widowed, dress him and his sister for school while simultaneously preparing for her shift at the garment factory. He was 8 years old again, remembered being left with neighbors, sometimes sleeping on a cot in the corner of his mother's workplace when childcare fell through. His mother had worked herself into an early grave to put him through community college. That education had been his springboard to everything else, the business degree, the first investment that paid off, the empire he'd built. But he'd forgotten somewhere along the way, insulated by wealth and success, what it actually felt like to be desperate, to be one missed paycheck away from catastrophe. James didn't announce himself. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call. By 10 a.m., Sarah had managed to settle Emma into a drowsy state when her supervisor appeared at her cubicle, face unreadable. "Sarah, Mr. Morrison would like to see you in his office now." The bottom dropped out of Sarah's world. Mr. Morrison, the owner. The man she'd seen exactly twice in 3 years, both times from a distance during company-wide meetings. This was worse than she'd imagined. They were firing her from the top down. With shaking hands, she gathered Emma and her things. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like a descent into execution. When the doors opened to the executive suite, with its mahogany paneling and artwork that probably cost more than her car, Sarah wanted to cry. James Morrison's assistant, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, greeted her with a warm smile. "Go right in, dear. And don't worry." "Don't worry," Sarah almost laughed. Instead, she knocked softly and entered when a deep voice called out. James Morrison stood by his window overlooking the city, hands clasped behind his back. He turned as she entered, and Sarah braced herself for the speech about professionalism and company policy. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked instead. Sarah blinked. "Emma, sir." "She's beautiful." He gestured to the leather chairs facing his desk. "Please sit." Sarah sat, confused and terrified, holding Emma like a shield. James settled into his own chair, his expression thoughtful. "I'm going to tell you something I haven't thought about in years. My mother was a seamstress. After my father died, she worked 16-hour days to support me and my sister. Sometimes, when childcare fell through, she'd bring us to the factory. The owner tolerated it because my mother was his fastest worker. She never complained, never asked for special treatment. She just did what she had to do to survive." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "I built this company on the foundation she gave me. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that every employee here has a story, has struggles I know nothing about." He leaned forward. "I'm not here to reprimand you, Sarah. I'm here to apologize. That you felt you had no choice, but to bring your infant to work. That tells me we've failed as a company." Sarah couldn't speak. Tears were already streaming down her face. "Effective immediately, we're implementing on-site childcare," James continued. "It'll take about 6 weeks to set up properly. But in the meantime, I've arranged for a professional childcare service to provide in-office support for any employee who needs it. No cost to you." I can't." Sarah struggled to find words. "Additionally," James said, pulling out a folder, "I've reviewed your work. Your analysis on the Chen account was exceptional. You've been underpaid and underutilized. Consider this your promotion to senior analyst, with a salary adjustment to match." Sarah openly sobbed now, clutching Emma close. "Why?" she managed. "Why would you do this?" James smiled, and for the first time, he looked less like an untouchable millionaire and more like someone's son, someone's father. "Because someone should have done it for my mother. Because every parent deserves to work with dignity. Because Emma deserves to have her mother present, not drowning in stress and fear." The story spread through Morrison and Associates like wildfire. Within days, the tale of the humble employee who brought her baby to work and the millionaire, who responded with compassion rather than punishment, had reached beyond the company walls. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. But for James Morrison, the real reward came 6 weeks later, at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Morrison and Associates Child Care Center. He watched Sarah, now confident in her new role, drop Emma off at the bright, welcoming facility before heading upstairs to work. He saw other parents relieved and grateful doing the same. and he thought of his mother. Gone 20 years now, and hoped somehow she knew that her sacrifice had planted seeds that bloomed even now, in unexpected ways in unexpected places. The center's wall bore a plaque, in memory of Grace Morrison, who taught her son that true wealth is measured in kindness. Sarah touched it gently as she passed by each morning, whispering her thanks to a woman she'd never met but who had changed her life across the decades. And Emma, growing stronger each day, would one day learn that her mother's moment of desperation had become a catalyst for change. Proof that sometimes, when we're brave enough to show up with our whole selves, with all our messy humanity intact, we give others permission to remember their own.